Del 2 av kvällen kommer vi ägna oss åt vad som sker med oss människor när vi ställs inför klimathotet. Erika Martins Silva Ramons forskar inom klimatpsykologi och kommer prata om grundläggande klimatpsykologi samt beröra sin egen forskning som fokuserar på transportbeteenden. Vi kommer även få ett annat perspektiv från Bards for Climate. Bards for Climate är en samling musiker, teaterpedagoger och filmskapare som har utvecklat en metod för omedelbar konstnärlig svar på politiska diskussioner kring klimatförändring. Metoden kallas PRISM eller att prisma. Sveining Nygård kommer berätta lite om varför han startade upp initiativet och vi kommer få se och höra prov på prismer som är gjorda under COP26. Okay, we're back again after a short little break and it's our pleasure to introduce Erika Ramos who's going to tell us about her research in environmental psychology and a few other things regarding climate anxiety and so on. So, yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. Nice to meet you. Some familiar faces. And hello everyone online. So my name is Erika and I'm a PhD student at the Department of Psychology at the University of Göteborg here in Göteborg. And my research is on environmental psychology, mostly on transportation. And but I have different interests in this field and I will try to bring to you a bit of an overview of what is environmental psychology, what do we do, how can we contribute for what we have been hearing here today. I think we heard lots about COP26, how nations are behaving, how politicians are behaving, and by the end of the interview we heard a bit of behaviors, how we individuals can change this, how can we help out with the climate change, and I think that's how I would be here and how I would pose my talk today is like how we individuals can behave in this scenario. So a short summary of my talk is presentation of environmental psychology, and then I will talk a bit of my own research in transport psychology, and I will talk about climate anxiety because it's something that emerges quite often when we talk about this topic. Maybe some of you had some feelings while you were hearing the negotiations and what can I do? And this creates a bit of feelings on us as well. And finally, I will try to talk a bit about how to answer to those feelings, how we can handle climate anxiety if we experience that somehow. So what is environmental psychology? We understand environmental psychology as an area of knowledge that is trying to understand and doing research in the studies on the human behavior as an individual, but also as a group, and how we interact with the environment. So it's always a back and forth. We affect the environment, but the environment also affects us. And how we behave as an individual also changes how we behave when we are in a group. Sometimes not, but sometimes it differs quite a lot. And that's where we psychologists are. We are looking at people and how they are behaving in certain environment. So which kind of research we do? What are we interested as a psychologist in environmental research? We are trying to look at the problem with different angles, and we start quite often with attitudes. When we do interviews, when we read on media, when we have research being done, or when we answer to surveys, online surveys, questionnaires, things like that, we are always expressing our attitudes. So what are our opinions and what kind of perceptions we have about a certain topic. And quite often we drive policies related to those attitudes. And can be some sort of support. We can have positive attitude towards something, and then we can endorse a politician, or we can endorse some sort of policy towards an environmental thing. But there is a small problem there, because attitudes is not necessarily behavior. What we say that we are going to do is not necessarily what we do. So we can endorse many positive attitudes towards environmental solutions, environmental policy, but we may not behave in the end of the day as we have imagined. And also, this also caused some sort of climate anxiety. So let's say people that we heard in the interview, they wanted to travel by train to COP26, but they may endorse positive attitudes toward environmental friendly ways of traveling, but it's so expensive, and then they fly. And this creates anxiety on us. It's not a positive feeling. And that's why when we create policies, we should be aware of those differences. Because the behavior in the end of the day can be quite difficult because other factors are affecting our behavior, such, for example, our values. Values are a common ground that we all share in our culture, but we also share in some specific groups. So some groups may share values that are positive towards the environment. Other groups may share values that are more individualistic. And those values are common ground where we big up our house. And the house is our behavior. So they are always driving how we behave, and they are always driving our attitudes as well. It's not easy to change values. So as a psychologist, we know that how we behave, there are levels. So the attitudes is the top of the iceberg, and the values are there. We cannot see them all the time, and it's interesting because some big events in life can do change values, but we don't change them like this. So, for example, there is a research showing when we become parents, we can change our values, for example. And that's good to know, good news, because it could be a strategy to have more pro-environmental behaviors. But it is not a policy that are going to change our values, for instance. So we cannot really work with values. They are there. They are formed across our lives. Maybe we can start working with this with kids because they are growing up, they are developing. But it's not something that we can work much. But we could change norms. And norms are something that we can easily change, and it's a very powerful factor that change our behavior. So maybe two persons endorsing the same attitudes, they could have different behaviors if the norms in the environment are different. We see norms everywhere, and we see it as a very powerful way of changing behavior. For example, very important on littering, for example. We have seen across research that people litter more on environments that are already littered. And if we start creating a social norm that endorses more pro-environmental behaviors, we could change those behaviors without necessarily having to work with people's values. It's just like a stimuli that comes from the environment and affects us in a certain way without it's no cost. We can just change the norms in the environment, and we can have a specific change in the behavior. That's a really powerful way of changing people's behaviors. And we talk about those aspects because in the end of this scale of behaviors, we are always looking to well-being. So psychologists are always looking to a way to make people feeling better. Even though if they were not sick before. It's not only working with pathologies, it's not just working with psychological disease. We also want to promote well-being and try to create an environment that's even better. If it's good, can be even better. But we are not in a situation right now that things are quite good. We have a lot to work on. And from the interview that we're talking, that we just watched, we heard about GDP, but we also heard about well-being as a way of measuring growth. And that's what we psychologists would go for. As a common ground, we also have the sustainable development as a background on our research. We are not looking only at well-being, but we see it in a holistic way. We see that the sustainable development will only happen if we can guarantee children's and next generation's needs. And how can we do that? How can we guarantee that those kids are going to have a way to guarantee their needs, a way to live and have a fulfilling life? That's quite tough. It's quite tough. And it's up to us individually to start doing something. My way of doing something was to pursue a PhD in environmental psychology, and my research is on the combination of those three things: transportation research, psychology, and sustainability, and trying to find new solutions in the new era of transportation that will guarantee a better urban environment. So what I've been investigating mostly is the behavior of sharing. We share transport modes all the time, and this is a very interesting way to guarantee accessibility, because then instead of having one vehicle for one person, we can have one vehicle for many persons. It's quite interesting. It can reduce parking, it can reduce production of vehicles, but there is also a bad side of it, because it can also generate overconsumption. So sharing one asset and making it a bit more available can also make it easier to be used, and then people start using it more and more and more. These days I went to the optician and I went to buy glasses, and I discovered that now it's a service. You can have a service in the optician, and you can change the lenses many times a year, and you can have appointments, and you can have different services just for having a glass. Instead of going there and buy one, you can have a service. Well, it can increase accessibility, but maybe people will start to change their lenses now and then just because they are having the service there. So it's tricky with sharing, and that's where I am now. We are looking at different ways that the individuals are using to move in the city with electric scooters, bike sharing, with cycling. You may have seen, and there is a tram over there, which is a typical way of sharing a vehicle, traveling together. It's controversial. We recently saw news that Mondal, for instance, here close to us, stopped having electric scooters, services of electric scooters, because of also other issues that come together in terms of security and safety of the users. So it's not a solution. It's not set in stone that this is the best solution for transportation, but it's a way to go. But it also needs some sort of regulation. There is also the use of shared vehicles, shared cars, car sharing, and I have been investigating it mostly because with this service we have seen in the literature that it reduced the ownership of a second car in the household. So it not necessarily substitutes the main car, but it has been a solution to substitute the second car. Some of the services work with electric vehicles. This is a print screen of one of the services that we have here in Sweden, in Gothenburg also. The idea is that instead of owning a car, you could share a vehicle with other people. And this could be done in different ways. One way is that you own a car and you share your car with another person by some sort of platform online service. But it's also a company that could own a fleet, and you book a car similar to renting a car, and you could use the car for a certain period of time. There are many different business models, and they have been grown across Europe. And they can be interesting, but they also come with problems, as I said before. What I have found with my research is that quite often we only look at social demographic aspects. We only look at difference between women and men, socioeconomic aspects, kinds of households, and lots of policies are created based on that. But there is not so much been done to look at people's behavior. So we have seen in our research that when we zoom in the transportation scenario, we see that the different business models of car sharing, they generate different kinds of patterns of travels. And some of them are generating even more travels, and some of them are substituting travels that could have been done by public transportation, metros, trams, and buses. So it's interesting for a certain kind of trips, but it's not something that would solve the problems for all kinds of households. For instance, it can be quite tricky for parents as well, because parents tend to have multiple trips with multiple purpose. They also need a car seat for the babies or the children, and this is something that you cannot have with the service. So for families, this can be tricky as well. Another thing that we saw is that when people are traveling for something sporadic, car sharing can be quite good. But when we come to routine-based trips, this service is not that interesting, because when we travel every day, we create some habits, and our habits also influence how we are going to behave in the future. And people with strong habits of driving private cars, they may not be super willing to use car sharing services. Together with that, we also looked at future transportation, because car sharing is something that we are seeing now. What comes next? And one thing that is coming next is self-driving cars. And lots of policies and regulations are coming to address this new service that is coming for us. And apparently, we don't really know what to do with that yet in urban cities. It's a bit similar to what happened with the scooters. The private sector came with this new idea, super interesting, and they are there in the streets, but there was no regulation on it. And what we did in one of our studies, that we interviewed users of vehicles. We interviewed urban planners and developers of vehicles that would be self-driving cars. And we tried to map what were their assumptions, their concerns, and also their hopes regarding these vehicles that are coming for the future. And everywhere we see in the image that is circled with red is because they had no consensus. So the population and the ones that are regulating and the ones that are producing this technology. It seems that we don't have a common ground when it comes to time frame. We don't know when this is going to happen. We don't know how it's going to be used. We don't know yet the state of the technology. How far are we in the process of having it in our cities? And we don't have a good common sense, common agreement of what are going to be the secondary effects. Is this going to reduce jobs? Is this going to increase the use of vehicles? Are we going to have more vehicles on the streets? And this is really important to investigate and to be aware of, because how we travel, and we all came here somehow, is something that we do every day, and we affect very much the environment with our daily travels. When we check in the research what are the main behavior that affects the environment at the individual level, the way that we travel affects very much the environment. And it's not only a technological problem, it's a social problem as well, because we are talking about behavior, and a behavior that affects very much the environment, not only in terms of consuming natural resources to produce the vehicles, but also because it affects the air quality where we live. And this can have short and long-term effects in our mental health. And also because it can create a different way of living in an urban environment that will negatively affect our well-being. So the urban environment can have a quite powerful effect on how we have on our emotions and how we perceive climate change itself. And this creates some sort of climate anxiety. It's really important that we don't understand climate anxiety as a pathological thing. It's just an emotional response. Of course, if the anxiety increases and it starts to be clinically significant, we do need to seek help. If it starts to affect how we sleep, how we eat, how we work. But when we are just having a negative feeling for seeing negative news about climate change, this is also something we can work with, but it's not necessarily a pathology. Climate anxiety can be an overall perception from what we see in media, but it can also come from discrete events like heat waves, hurricane, flooding, wildfire, and drought. And there are some risk groups that are more prone to experience this, which are children, elderly, indigenous peoples, and farmers, because they are closer to the environment, so they can see it quite quicker than us that are living in the urban environment. And kind of symptoms that comes with climate anxiety are depression, anxiety, substance abuse, domestic violence. All those things have been identified as connected to climate anxiety, together with a negative emotions such as hopelessness, anger, and grief. But there are ways to respond to it. There is not something that we are locked on it. We can work with that. And to respond to climate anxiety, we can look at trying to create a sense that we have power to change, which is what we call in psychology self-efficacy. And I think it's from what we heard in the interview, it's a bit that when we talk about kids and new generations, it's like this feeling of power to change. We can look at the problem and try to be a bit more problem-focused, but we can also look to our own emotions and try to work with that. And also creating meaning, because when we work with those three things together, it becomes easier to handle climate anxiety. And one thing that the literature and research has shown is that climate change activism is also a way of a good way to cope with climate anxiety, because we start having this feeling that we have the power to change things. And I think this is a good way to start to change not only our emotions, but also to try to tackle the problem and plant trees, and can have both effects for the environment and for us as well. And I hope that you may find something in nature that you can relate to. Maybe not everyone wants to be so close to a monkey. Maybe some people would be stressed. Others would be just prefer meditation, maybe, or just stop in the park and work a bit from the park. Answer emails if it's the case. It's important that each of us try to find a way to escape a bit, and each person has its own way to do it. Yes, so that's environmental psychology, a bit of what we do. And if you have questions, this is my email. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe we have some questions. I have several. I will start with one question to you.
Yes.
I was thinking about when you talked about climate change activism, and I was thinking, how much of that do you think that we feel better when we do something? How much is that the social factor, that actually we can maybe meet other people that are involved just like us ourselves, that we feel connected to other people? How big part of the solution is that, or connection to others?
Yeah, I think it could be a kind of snowball, because at the same time that you are connected to people and you feel good, and so then you could handle emotions better for finding people that think similar to you or that share the same values that you. But at the same time, it's also problem solving, because you could start having a bigger group, you could start to influence more people, and then that's how social movements, they grow. And it could be both. It's never just one way. When we interact with people and with the environment, it's always both ways. So I think activism would be a way to try to tackle the problem, but also to try to give meaning to yourself and to your own actions.
So, and if you feel hopelessness, for me that's a sign of not, giving up, or it's no use for me doing anything, I can't change anything. Would you say that a strong recommendation then would be to try to get that person to be active in or to do something practical or to get started with something, and that could be a way out of the hopelessness, or how do we tackle that?
Yeah, it always depends on the degree. So if it's a very strong degree, of course, psychological help would be necessary, an intervention with a professional. But if we are talking about a sporadic hopelessness or a medium level of hopelessness, one way is the first way is try to help this person not be locked or shocked or stopped on a specific situation, because it's really difficult to start to be active or to involve in activism when you are really down. So the best strategy is to help this person to get on a good mood, at a minimum mood, that then from that the person can get engaged on activism. No one would engage in activism if they are really depressed. So first is taking care of your own emotions. When you're a bit stronger, then you start going through the world. Usually that's how it works better.
When talking about climate activism, I have a question about counterproductivity. When it comes to, for yourself, it might be, you might feel more sort of empowered by the activism, but I know that we have been talking about the Greta effect, that it might be counterproductive for some people to sort of have it shoved in your face that what you're doing is totally wrong and you have to start doing this and this and this and this and you can't do that. So can you see like a counterproductive thing out of climate activism as well, or?
Yeah. And a bit of shame as well, right? Yeah. If someone is not on the same line, it could be difficult if this starts to be some sort of social judgment as well, that you are not, if it's shown that you are not being productive as you should be. Of course, there is this perspective, especially if it's really highlighted from the media. We end up being quite influenced, and it's not helpful at all. But I wouldn't agree that we shouldn't have more Greta's effect. Like we is much more like trying to give tools for people, like being here today in a room, and then we can share this experience. It doesn't need to be something super big. We don't need to be 100,000 in the street. It could be just 3 persons talking about the topic. But that's a lot with giving the meaning, because if it's meaningful being 3 persons, then it's good. But if there's no meaning on that, then the person involved wouldn't feel good about it. So it's much more about meaning than how many or how much you are doing. Greta is affecting many people, but maybe 3 regular persons could also do something. That's what I would say about it.
No, I have lots of questions, but maybe we should go on also with the program. Do you have any questions from the audience or online? Otherwise, I think it's time for Bards to introduce yourselves.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dear artist, in November 2021, the world leaders will gather in Glasgow for the UN Climate Conference, the COP26. We want to help artists of any discipline to make their voices heard in this setting by inviting you to do your own prism.
A prism is a spontaneous artistic response to a political or technical talk. A time-limited effort lasting no more than 8 hours.
When this period is over, we will repost the prisms that you post and that you have ownership of.
Immediate, simple, intuitive, from the gut. A saga, a song, a poem, a painting.
Let the message pass through you, be a prism for the information.
You can help people see and feel so they can embrace hope and solutions in the face of this overwhelming situation. We are a network of artists called the Bards.
And we believe that art is a powerful tool for change.
Bards is a term from the Middle Ages where art was present at the courts of the kings. And we took inspiration for this to use art in a climate setting, because we believe we're a group of artists. 4 of us are here now today, Marcus and Olena and Nina and me, from different places. And we believe that art has a significant role to play in the climate discussion, because there's a gap between information, the technical side of things, and motivation. We see people inside and outside, and we believe that this climate situation is an identity crisis. Something was wrong in the past, and we need to find a new way. Either we will change as humanity, or we will be changed, because the change is upon us if we like it or not. And we're an international group of artists, and we want to apply our arts and our creative thinking and our networks to help this discussion, to engage with politicians and business people, and help artists to speak truth, to be empowered, to use their art for positive change. Because we need to move forward, we need to find a new identity as humanity. And so we're developing some tools with this. Some of the things we do is internal. Who are we as artists? What values drives us? And where do we come from? How do we see the world? How do we see opportunities and possibilities? How do we see people and problems? But also we're developing these tools. One tool that has been a communal storytelling tool called Postcards from the Future, where we tell stories from the future back to ourselves today, what you would change, and trying to engage that with our future selves via role-playing tools. We're also developing this tool called Prisming, where we listen to something that we perceive as boring or meaningless, but could be important, and we try to listen in to what is the core here, what is the heart, what is the passion, and try to reflect that in a piece of art. It's a quick thing, it's intuitive, we listen to it, and we speak back quickly in order to make the dialogue and discussion more emotional. Emotions is a tool that artists have access to, because that is what we work with, our emotions, and we believe that we have to bridge the gap between emotions and technicality. So this is an age of storytelling, and our prisms is part of making this into a storytelling exercise, not just a technical exercise or demonstration exercise. And we feel that emotions are connected to values. If we can get to people's emotions, not just negative emotions, not just positive emotions, but the whole spectrum, we are close to accessing people's value systems, and that is powerful. And I see that in politicians and business people and artists, that is where the battle is fought, not on paper with the spreadsheets and facts. It's a storytelling thing. So at COP26 now, we have been inviting artists to take part in this, to listen to some of what Greta would call blah blah blah, and some of it is blah 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 at the COP. We'll try to listen in. What is the core here? What can we listen for? We've been doing poems, songs, visual art, and other interesting things on our Instagram account. And we feel this is a powerful thing, and people get inspired from this. But we also get inspired from doing this because we are practicing listening. There are a lot of people talking, and we need more people listening. And we need a simplicity of an artist with a pen, a guitar, being simple people. Because some of the problems we have that we are too complex, we moved away from the nature-based solutions of a person and a guitar and a pen, and just the simple things of passion and blood and nature. So basically something along those lines. Yeah.
So what we did was that we urged people to log on to the UNFCCC's media channel and to do something out of what they heard, and to spend not more than a working day doing this. Because in some art forms, I would say in most art forms, you could probably continue forever with composing or producing or whatever you do, because if there's no time limit, you'll continue. But we decided that maybe if this is like an immediate response, something that you do instantly when you hear something, then you would also channel your emotions that you have exactly at the moment when you get inspired. And also possibly put away some of the pressure that you get as an artist or creator of some sort when you create something that is supposed to be externally communicated. So when we started doing this, we only did like you said, Svenning, we did internal things. We tried this amongst ourselves, and then we did some feedback. But I think I showed 4 people my first Prism that I did this summer. I tried a Prism last summer, but it didn't work out for me. What most people wanted to do was to engage on Instagram, because that's instant, something you do right away. And if you keep your Prism, your sort of your art, if you keep it to something less than 59 seconds, then it's very easy to just post and repost. And then we've also had some small images and poems, but mostly music through Instagram. And everyone who's doing the Prisms use the same hashtag, and they tag our Prism, our Instagram account, so we can repost it for everyone to see. So that's basically just what we did, and it's been a very exciting start on the Prism adventure, and I think that that's about that. So if you have any questions for us, we would like to hear them.
Can we see some examples?
Yes, of course. We can do that. Do we have... maybe, yeah.
They don't make a sound. Am I deaf or is no one speaking? I don't make a sound. Am I mute or is no one listening? Nothing changes without you. Everything changes with you. Nothing changes without you. Everything changes with you. So will climate drive us apart? Now will climate drive us apart?
It's important to say that this of course is fast, and there's no excuse in that. But it's a very powerful thing to just let go of the critical mindset and just dive in and engage like a child almost. It's very powerful internally, I would say.
I am happy to be here today as an indigenous woman that consider forest and land as home, not as commodity.
Worlds apart. Can we go back to the start? Breathe in, breathe out. A seed of trust, will it turn into a flower? Will we walk the line, or will we settle for
guilt-free chocolate? We will all be able to enjoy guilt-free chocolate. Guilt-free chocolate. We will all be able to enjoy guilt-free chocolate.
Thank you.
A letter to the world. Plant yourself a seed. Plant a seed of hope. Drop your tears sweet for the seed to grow. Plant yourself a tree, color it with green. Roots are strong and free if the soil's clean. Paint maps with love. Blow the death with rain. Hurricanes above, bringing lots of pain. Wash the seas with blue. Leave the islands be. Tell the story true. Never lie to me.
Now, as soon as possible. 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 The
the door in my face, so give me sparks of hope. A call for justice. That time is now, that time is now. Now, as soon as possible. Now, as soon as possible.
As soon as possible. As soon as possible. As soon as possible. As soon as possible.
Great. The danger of showing these things, it's really fun to show them. The danger is that you can get locked into a way of doing things, and it's really wide open. You can do whatever you want to, as long as you're honest and constructive. We can talk about how these prisms came about. We got inspired. Probably some of the words and here specifically were taken from the talk themselves, but you can do this in many different ways. Basically, there's a problem with the climate situation. The climate is a problem now because we have these monocrops. We have single solution orientated past where we go for oil or we go for single solutions. And the prisms is intended to be a multi-solution approach. So there are many ways of doing things. And I think this is an example of how the future should work, that there are many solutions, not just, like Bremley was saying, a monocrop of silver bullet solutions.
And we were thinking, because hopefully we will get a lot more prisms during this process, and we have recorded the session tonight, and we will put it out on the website in a week or two. But also we would be we hope that we could be able to link to prisms and show a variety of different expressions from the process in COP, but perhaps also responding to tonight.
Angry people, anxious talks, world is cripple, lonely walks. Many numbers, words to break, trees to lumbers, earth will shake. Blue for bottom, green for tops, humans' autumn never stops.
It goes like this. A schoolgirl put an acorn in the soil. Upon the banks of River Clyde, the grown-ups kept drilling for the oil. Let her promises aside. A woman chained her body to an oak. On the banks of River Clyde, the Amazon was turned to ashes and smoke. Despite agreement certified, climate change monsoon rains fill the skies. Above the banks of River Clyde, a nobleman was taken by surprise. by the flooding and the tide. The water reached her feet, her knees, her waist. At the banks of river Clyde, when fully covered by the stream's embrace, she lost her grip and started to slide. Then suddenly a branch detained her cloak. At the banks of river Clyde, she grabbed it and she climbed a steady oak. And as it at its crown she found a high. As sun rays broke the foliage at last, upon the banks of river Clyde, the rescue team found a lady put to rest. Upon her limbs smile of pride.